Now we've got an interesting interview for you guys. We're going to talk to Dan Balz, who's a writer for the Washington Post. He's also the author of The Battle for America, 2008, the story of an extraordinary election. He wrote it with Haynes Johnson. Dan, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. You know, I got a couple of questions that have always interested me on this issue that I want to hit you with. One, everybody talks about, and you guys do as well, that John McCain really wanted to pick Joe Lieberman. And he was pained that he couldn't. Well, what was stopping him? I thought he was a maverick. Why didn't he just pick the guy he wanted?
Well, you know, it wasn't quite that simple. He didn't pick him in the end because he was persuaded, and I think probably rightly, that had he done it, he'd have blown up the Republican convention and would have left St. Paul with a very, very divided party, and he'd had to struggle for weeks to try to pull the party back together, and it would have even less chance of then reaching out to the middle. So, you know, Lieberman, he likes Lieberman. He likes Lieberman a lot. There was an attractiveness to it. The main attractiveness to it, in addition to the close personal relationship, was that they were going to basically say, we're going to serve one term. We're not, you know, there's going to be a one-term presidency here. We're going to come in, we're going to operate sort of across party lines to some extent, particularly on a lot of the domestic issues. We're going to try to get things done. We're going to tackle issues that people have been unwilling to tackle. And then we're gone after 4 years. But politically, he couldn't do it. I mean, Joe Lieberman's position on social issues would have been anathema to the Republican base.
Well, Dan, I have to be honest with you. That one-term stuff, I don't believe it for a second.
Well,
you know, sure, right. A politician, after being president for 4 years, says, yeah, I'll give it up, no problem.
Well, we do know that both McCain's campaign manager and the guy who was in charge of the vetting process talked specifically to Lieberman about that, and would he agree to it?
Yeah, he'd agree to it now, of course, to get on the ticket. Would he agree to it 4 years from now? That's a different question. Does that make sense, Dan?
Well, you know, anybody can go back on their word, but if you run on a one-term pledge and then you go back on it, you risk the wrath of the voters. But
right.
You know.
All right. Now, the second part of this is, given what you're saying here, how in the world are the Republicans ever going to win another national election? And the reason I say that is, if they feel that they have to appease their base, without any reservation, then they can't ever pick a moderate. And I'm amused that we're using Lieberman here as the moderate, but let's use Tom Ridge. I think that's a fairer example. A moderate Republican that's going to appeal to the independents and the moderate voters. How can they ever win?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's one of the problems that they've really got. I mean, the country has changed out from under them in a lot of ways. I mean, the demographic forces that are moving in this country are almost all moving against the Republicans. The rise of the Latino vote and the significance of that, we saw the impact of that in a lot of the Rocky Mountain states last November. The growing number of young people who are voting and the decisive way in which they've gone for Democrats, not just for Barack Obama in 2008, but for other Democratic candidates both in 2008 and 2006. They are a growing part of the electorate, 4 million more, coming on, and much more diverse than the older generation. So the Republicans have a lot of problems. On the other hand, politics is organic. It's dynamic. It's not static. If President Obama runs into a lot of problems in his first term, if the economy doesn't bounce back, let's say he gets health care through, but it's a big problem in implementing it. I mean, there are a whole series of things that can change people's perceptions. The middle of the electorate in the last two elections moved strongly toward the Democrats. But, they're not entirely attached to the Democrats at this point. They could move in another direction. So, there's no question that the Republicans are in a very low point, but, politics changes quickly sometimes.
Yeah. No, I don't see it. I think they're a generational minority. Could they win a couple of seats in 2010 because they blame everything that goes wrong on the Democrats? Sure. I mean, that's what minority parties do. It's a very normal part of politics, and that could work in the short term. But in the long term, they're going to run into that brick wall of demographics. And on the issues, too, I mean, how long can you say to the American people, we don't want to fix any of your problems? We don't believe in fixing your problems. We don't even believe in the offices we're running for. We don't believe in the government and hope to win elections.
Well, one of the sort of conundrums that the Republicans have not solved is that so much of the energy that has gotten them elected, this was particularly true when they took over Congress in 1994, and it's been an underlying or core part of their message, and that is an anti-government message. When you are in power, you've got to govern, and it's hard to be a governing party and also be anti-government. And they never solved that under George W. Bush. He figured out a way in 2000 to talk about issues, to have a more activist domestic agenda in that election, particularly on education. But once in power, he was, they spent more money at a rapid pace than anything since Lyndon Johnson. They could not resolve their internal conflicts over immigration, and both the conservatives in the Republican base were disenchanted, and the middle was disenchanted.
Yeah, and I think John McCain got caught in the middle there. If he had run one way or another, look, I'm a diehard Republican, he says, and he runs in that direction, or he says, look, I'm a moderate, and I'm going to try to win this thing by appealing to the moderates. He might have had a shot one way or another, but it seems like he got caught in the middle, and then he went with Sarah Palin to appease his base, and then disaster struck. So let's talk about that for a quick second. We're talking to Dan Balz. He's the lead political reporter for the Washington Post and the author of The Battle for America 2008. Who was behind the decision to bring in Sarah Palin?
Well, several of the people who were at the top of the McCain campaign came to the conclusion that they needed to do something game-changing to shake up the race. Their view was that structurally, this was a terrible year to be a Republican running for president. The country was in an unhappy mood. President Bush's approval ratings were below 30%. The economy, obviously got worse after he picked Sarah Palin, but the economy was weak. This was a change election set up for the Democrats. Their feeling was, if we can't change the dynamic, there's no way we can win. How do you change the dynamic? Well, you do something surprising in a vice presidential pick. Now, I would say they picked Sarah Palin not just to energize the base, but also because they felt that she gave McCain an opportunity to talk and act and sound like a reformer. Because, when she got elected as governor in Alaska, she ran and beat the incumbent governor in the election. She ran as a reformer. They thought maybe she could restore some of that luster to McCain's image as a maverick. It obviously didn't work.
But Dan, who was behind it? Was it really, I read the story about Bill Kristol goes and some of the top neocons, et cetera, are on a cruise ship. They run into Sarah Palin. They say, all right, why don't we get... was it really...
I think that's an oversimplification. She had some supporters within the conservative ranks of the Republican Party. But, the vice presidential decision was one that was done at the highest levels of the McCain campaign. Rick Davis, who was the campaign manager, was somebody who felt she could add something significant to the operation. Steve Schmidt, who was helping to run the campaign day to day, also felt she had the possibility of, as he put it, restoring McCain's reform mojo. So they went to McCain the week before the Republican convention and basically said, you really need to think about putting her on the ticket.
Dan, aren't they, along with ultimately John McCain, responsible for doing terrible job on homework and not realizing that she wasn't anywhere near ready to be vice president?
Perfectly legitimate criticism. I think that they went through what I would say the sort of the legal vetting process, or the sort of the formal vetting process, which was to, check for skeletons in the closet and look at her public record and things. But what they did not do, and because they did not spend enough time either with her or really thinking through this, she wasn't ready to be on the national stage. She has some very natural political talents. I think everybody would agree with that. But she was not ready to be on the national stage. And also, she didn't have anybody around her who was sort of wise enough and savvy enough to say to her, you know what, this sounds great, but this is not the year for you to do this. You need more seasoning. So it's a combination of the McCain campaign kind of rushing into this with the idea they just needed something to shake it up, and nobody around Palin saying, you know what, this is not that great an idea.
I got to be honest with you, it makes me despair of politics and almost democracy, because how do you say a person who doesn't even know who Hamas is? She runs for vice president of the United States of America. God knows what could happen to John McCain. And she just needs a little more seasoning? No, she's incompetent. She doesn't know a thing about politics. She obviously doesn't care.
But you could also look at it and say, well, the voters took a look at her. They didn't know anything about her, and in the end, they decided she wasn't ready.
So that's true. That's a very good point. Cause for optimism. All right. Before we let you go, I got to talk about the Democratic side just a little bit. What happened in Iowa? What was the principal reason Obama got in there, and when they certainly didn't expect it 6 months earlier than that, wound up taking that, and Hillary came in third? What made the biggest difference?
Well, there are two factors. The first is he ran a very, very good campaign. His campaign from the start, from the day he announced for president, was focused on Iowa. It was like Iowa to the exclusion of everything else in terms of resources, his time, his energy, and the organization they built. The second was he spent a lot of time, and a lot of difficult time, and we go through in the book the early months of his candidacy in which he was not a particularly strong candidate, and it was not a very happy candidate. But he found his way through that, and in the fall, in the November of 2007, gave a very, very strong speech at an Iowa Democratic dinner that galvanized a message about change and leadership and a contrast with Hillary Clinton that caught fire in Iowa in that last 6 weeks. The second factor is Iowa was always the worst environment for Hillary Clinton of any place in the country. You know, you think about the way the calendar unfolded. If it had started somewhere else, perhaps in New Hampshire, we might have had a different outcome. Bill Clinton had never spent any real time campaigning in Iowa when he ran for president in 1992. Hillary Clinton had not spent time. They didn't have a network there, and they started out with a situation in which Iowan, even Democratic Iowans, were skeptical of her. They never quite warmed up to her, and she never quite warmed up to them. And so she was in a difficult position. She didn't solve her problem in Iowa, and Barack Obama did.
Hey, I got to squeeze in one last question here. What I can't figure out is, what did Obama do that others have never been able to do? You know, why can't, for example, Feingold run and catch the same lightning in a bottle? What is it that Obama had that a Feingold couldn't hope to have, that he didn't even bother entering the race, for example?
Well, there's no textbook for it. I mean, Barack Obama, came on the political scene with that speech in Boston in 2004 at the Democratic convention, and it was like, the candle the candle was lit and it never went out. People saw something in Obama that struck a very powerful chord. He had a quality as a candidate who could inspire people, and he developed great passionate feeling. I think part of it was the message that he could change the nature of politics, that he could put us past the old fights of the 1960s and the divisions of the 1990s and the red and blue. Easier said than done, as he's learning as president. But there's nobody can say, well, I'm going to kind of go to school on what Barack Obama did and try to do it myself. There is a quality of candidacy there that fit the moment, and that's what was so important. And you can't sort of say, well, if he did it, I can do it. He fit the time. And winning candidates are those who understand where the country is at a particular moment, have a message, a persona, and a quality of leadership that strikes people as the right thing at that time, and he had it.
Dan Balz is the lead political reporter for the Washington Post and the author of The Battle for America 2008. We'll put that up on the YoungTurks.com library where everybody can check it out. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
Thanks, my pleasure.